hello. So we've been thinking and listening to amazing presentations for last 2 days, and we've been creating this mirror map together with you, with all of you. And before we are go deep dive into analyzing it and reviewing some of the works of uh, our participants of the ideaton from Australia who couldn't join us hour, but Chris will walk us through their works. We will see another a submission from Australia, from Sydney, from university there, and Matt is going to play this message for us. And later on, we will also hear from Mark, who is a designer and who will share with us his ideas how we can design with olfaction, and also Yujei, who was inspired by our conference. He will also share his insight about how we can build the empathy interface for different creatures. Okay, let's start maybe with the video mat of our collaborators from Australia, and I will put in the chat mirror board for all of you to revisit. And we have Yujei also joining us. Please rename yourself and you will be speaking soon. I'm very curious what you thought about. Matt, do we have an Australian video? Hello, hello. Chris, do you hear me? Copy that.
Yeah, I can hear
you. Okay, good.
I think I go on to the Australian submissions.
Yeah, so maybe while Matt is looking for the video that we prepared to show you and share with you, Chris can tell a little bit about the submissions of the projects that,
okay.
that will be with
I'll
us.
share my screen.
Yes, that would be awesome. And I'm putting mirror board link in the chat for all of you to have a look.
So we have a section on the website called Osmocosm, and I encourage you to look at those because they're some very interesting ideas. This is rather coming from a scientific point of view and a specialist activity. It's coming from an art and design point of view, which is one example of combining, as Andreas said, a number of different disciplines and thinking how they work together, because it's quite useful to have these pictured for us, how this technology turns up in society. So, for example, if you look at the daily use of smell sensing apps, this is from a number of people in Australia, which, sorry, I was blocking my screen at the moment, but there are a group of students who have produced this cartoon, and there's some explanation of it there. This is University of Technology, Sydney. Yeah. So this starts to get very specific about how this technology might affect people's lives in the larger sense. And it's important that it's very interesting that things represented by caricatures are very recognizable by the brain. And so I commend all the students who have done this, of thinking through how people affect, how sense affects people's behavior, and how the analysis of data can play a role in everyday life, sometimes without us knowing, and sometimes drawing our attention to things that are very important. So essentially, using a cartoon is a very good technique for communicating how this is seen in society. We just heard a lot of discussion about how apps are designed and how are people going to develop acceptance of this technology. Well, they need to have something occurring between the science and between their acceptance. And this kind of approach is one way of doing it through the use of caricature. If you look on the website, you'll see that there's an explanation of how they did this. Theodora Cable, Ali Chalmers, Braithwaite, and Natalia Bohemia from University of Technology, Sydney. If we go to another one, this is another brilliant approach using an imaginary newspaper, which looking into the future, the stink punk flyer, news from the future, and the imaginary pages of a different newspaper.
And I'm sorry to jump in here, Chris, but that is so compelling. I love that newspaper. Please, whoever made it, I want to thank you. I was just having such a great time reading this. It is on our website. Please go look at it. It's in Osmoscapes. If you go to the top right. And thank you, Chris, for organizing this. This newspaper really put it into context with me. The fact that it's pretending as if this future is already here, and it's whimsical and beautiful, and it is what is necessary for us to manifest this future. It's just to see it in our heads as not only a possibility, but an inevitability with the good and the bad that it brings. And I think the good far outweighs the bad, so long as we do it right. So thank you again for this newspaper. The Sentinel is my favorite newspaper.
Yeah. Well, we'll have to invent a subscription. Yeah, but a newspaper format is something that's already accepted and habituated. So changing the content of the newspaper is what's going to draw people's attention to these affairs. And it's a very brilliant idea. Anyway, I encourage you to look at that. You can... I encourage you to read all the content because it's very imaginatively done, and it addresses in a different way, in a kind of relaxing way. It addresses many of the things that we've talked about acceptance of the technology.
If I may say one more thing about what I really loved about this effort by the students is that they also addressed what happened to them as a result of pursuing this goal of creating some content for this. And they say it here very clearly. They say things that first of all, they ask questions such as, is it better for society if this technology grows by going viral, or should it be pursuing specific problems? And then they also mentioned that they really, truly changed in their feeling about this technology in creating this content. They started gaining a sense of ownership of it, which I think is key to bringing it to the masses quickly. We can't wait for this to go via the doctors, even though we love the doctors and we have them here, and they're absolutely essential to bringing it to the patients. To bring it to the masses is no good to do it top down. It has to be bottom up, meaning that it has to go to everyone, and people have to feel ownership, just like we feel ownership over our cameras. Everybody and their grandmother without any photography training can point and click on their smartphone and take a picture. That's the key to getting it everywhere.
Society level,
Yeah.
which is important. Shall I just show Charlie Youngkin's video as well?
Please do. Yes, this is really good stuff here.
And regarding the newspaper, I think we had like the slide from one of our presenters and speakers who was like weirdly reminding me of this work. I must recall which presentation was that, but that was like really interesting.
What is your smell sharing about you? We're not very fluent in the language of smell, but dogs, medical detection dogs, are. Their ability to detect like the chemical signature of different diseases is being used to train handheld devices that could read your scent. Imagine what will happen when your phone can smell you, and not just like whether you stink, but actually read into that information about you. You could wake up with a notification saying you have COVID or cancer, or worse. Currently, you don't own any of the data you create, so that information could just be sold to the highest bidder, like your insurer or your employer. The responsibility of anyone that's building this has to be to ask that question of how is this going to be exploited once we put it out into the world.
So Charlie has a business called Designtist, where they produce very short clips. And I think we're learning that the shorter you put over key information, the better, because we're so saturated with information. You know, we're getting used to seeing things and talking, but things that are very short are well worth our attention. So Zoe Sadiowski from Sydney has put these together and run it as a class. And as Andreas says, I think the students get an insight into the subject through making these community level activities rather than the source level, front end, the technical stuff. There is also this end, there is also the community acceptance, the cartooning of it, what does it really mean, imagining the activities. So that's an important role that this will play in the future. I think just for now, if you look on the Osmocosm website, there's other student work that's contributed. But for now, I think I'll hand over to Carolina to finish that bit.
Yes, great, Chris, for showing us the webpage. We will hear from students from School of Form later today. We are going to have first students' presentations. And now I would like to ask Mark, who is ready to present, and he has been inspired by the possibilities of scent and olfaction technologies. And he was like such an amazing help with monitoring chat, and he's been with us from the beginning of the conference. So like kudos to you. Thank you, Mark. And please share with us your thoughts. We are like so very curious and waiting for you.
Yes, well, thank you. You know, it's been wonderful. It's been an amazing conference so far, and there's so many ideas that have come to mind. So can you see my slides? Yes.
Yes, we can.
You're perfectly positioned. Go ahead.
So essentially, you know, it's kind of broad, and it's kind of a lot of things have come into my mind and thinking about. Right, we're hearing a lot about the science. We're hearing a lot about the technology. We're hearing about possible use cases, and also a little bit about the law and about policy, which got me thinking, especially with yesterday's talk by David Stroll, and thinking about the role of the designer within all of this, which I think, right, we all have to be in these interdisciplinary teams. We all have to be in constant communication to kind of, you know, really think about the possibilities from all different facets of life and how things are being built today. So, so many ideas have come into my mind, and I've been doing a little bit of sketching and a little bit of collecting a little mood board. And the big thing that I think I keep missing and wanting, and it was touched upon in the first day, was seeing the unseen. And right, and how do we even begin to get people on board and get people to understand what is going on in this invisible world around us? And if we get people to see things, and especially in the visual world where everything is being seen, everything is being right within the 5 seconds, 10 seconds, it kind of comes into your life. So maybe perhaps by seeing, smells, or seeing sound in our natural landscapes, we could say, okay, this is what that means. This is present. This is not just an invisible thing that people could take advantage of or could be sold without my knowledge, but this could potentially be an asset, or this could be something that's very important to just me as a person. So with that, I was just collecting certain images to kind of showcase how different fields are doing it, how especially in the sound world, right? People are trying to visualize sound, and they have these energy maps and sound maps, and the waveforms. These things have been around. So, do we need to create these visual kind of cues for smell, right? All these molecules being different, and a lot of kind of interaction, and a lot of reoccurring, right, molecules that might seem different or be part of multiple different scents. And then of course you look into the installation, into the art world, and how, right, art could be provocative. Art could kind of bring these things to right, to all people, to the general public. And I think, right, maybe there are some opportunities with installation, with art installations, with visualization, where I think we just put this out there, and say, hey, right, all these smells are around us, all these sounds are around us. Even pictures exist in this kind of ephemeral state. So how do we get there, right? I mean, the technology is slowly coming there, where we can detect. Right now it might not be in the scale that we might want, but in the potential future, how can we utilize, VR technology, or much more XR technology, right? Wearables, and opportunities for us to see that. And I think from this, these are a few little, just fun little animation sketches. Um, and and for me, I think it also could really start in the very personal level, right? Something as simple as opening up your fridge and saying, oh, like, look at those scent particles there, right? That's still good, or that is going bad, or maybe, a cheese has a different kind of aura. And I think through these maybe non-human ways, we could slowly start introducing the idea of sense, the idea of visualizing sense, the idea that these things are all around us and are now being picked up by our phone or by whatever wearable that we're utilizing. And right, we're constantly, scrolling on our phone, and even thinking about water and water quality, but very human level things that I think will kind of maybe help us bridge that gap, that divide. um, and then obviously the big one is, right, is how do you visualize that data, and how does that with olfaction? And let's say olfaction is a new, just like we have the MP3, right? We can have the OSM or something, right? Where it's a different data type, and we will have to interface. There'll have to be a different interface, a different way of interacting with sense. It simply can't be these lists, right? The way that we're categorizing data in our computers or in our cell phones, right? I think design has to be a really, really important part of how do we actually manage. If we do want to sell our data, how do we actually do that? How does that look more human? It's not just, click here if you agree to do all these kind of things. So I think making it simple, making it beautiful, and making it just right, direct and kind of clear with the opportunity and ability to go and dive deeper if you are one of those people, right, that want to get into the APIs and want to see all that data streams. But I think for the common, and we're thinking about Samsung, and we're thinking about 100 million deployed, it has to be simple, it has to be easy, and it has to be, you know, an experience that we enjoy and that we could also take ownership of. And at least for me, thinking as a designer and being in this room, you know, I think, okay, let's make these systems, let's think about the systems mapping and all these different opportunities that are there, and let's work together to just build it from the bottom up. And and yeah, I mean, that's a little bit of where I've been and what I'm thinking about, and what I'm going to continue pursuing, at least, you know, in minimally viable products that could be utilizing things like HoloLens or AR technology to kind of just get that ball rolling and let people see these things right now. So that's it.
Thank you, Mark. That's really like the huge opportunity for designers to jump in, and I really love the OSM and ending of the files that could become the universal format for Osmo data. That's great. Stay a little, stay with us. And we are curious like of your other ideas, and we need to add your works to the webpage. I think we didn't. I don't know how that have happened.
Oh, we'll put it up. And
Well,
Carolina, you just said a very interesting word. You said Osmo data. I've never considered it before. I've been calling it scent data, but Osmo data is better. It's better sounding. I think that's it. This is the moment. October 30th, 2021, Carolina Sulich invented a new term that will be dominating the planet. Osmo data. That's the data of scent. I love it. Much better than scent data. Scent data sounds like something you already sent somewhere. Osmo data, osmi is the sense of smell in the ancient Greek and the current Greek, modern Greek. So Osmo data is your.
Yes, and now we will hear from Yujei Wang from MIT. And Yujei has been working on creating as like empathetic relationship between us and other creatures, other species. And he has been inspired by this technology, and he wonders how it can assist him. So he will tell us about his thoughts. And Yujei, you're with us because I can see you in our panelist.
Okay, yeah. Thank you very much for Caroline and Andrews to hosting this very interesting conference on olfaction. I'm a graduate student at MIT, an HCI researcher, especially interested in cognition as well as ecosystem. And I have a proposal of empathic smelling of animals in mixed reality perspective taking game. The objective of my research would be to foster human empathy towards animals through empathic smelling. And I study various sensor modalities. So I just adapt and came up with the smelling version of my research during this conference. And before I work more on the listening and the vision side. And I believe that smelling as a non-human will change our ecological impact on this planet. The approach I want to do this is through transsensory listening. And I want to develop a mixed reality perspective taking game that has this human-animal empathic storytelling. So I would briefly talk about this, and it would be like 3 stages. The first one is to investigate the approaches, how to do the transsensory mapping of humans to animals, because we have very different sensor modality, also different sensory resilience. So by studying of animal behavior and sensory ecology, it will inform some ways that we can achieve possible ways to do that. And the second stage, I want to prototype a field of immersion, and this included the visual immersion with mixed reality headset, the body immersion of like wearables, and also the environment immersion with spatial sensor network. And the third stage, I want to develop the mixed reality perspective in game that will consider this empathic storytelling, and the storytelling will inform the game content and interaction. And then at the same time, gather the real-time biofeedback through the observation of actions and interview survey would be able to evaluate the empathy building effectiveness. And the origin of my interest comes from a lot of my consideration of environmental and technological challenges today, because also even the internet, the targeted online content make us everyone's different things. So it's harder for us to relate to ourselves, to other people, and then even harder to other species. I think the psychological distance from us to the critical problem challenges we're facing is the main barrier for public engagement and action. In terms of space, in terms of time, like the behavior today will have consequences maybe several years later, and or the social distance, like the cultural disfamiliarity from the challenges other peoples or other species are facing. And I think immersive and wearable system offers this opportunity that to shrink the psychological distance. And eventually, I want to shift the value system and ethical boundary shift that from anthropocentrism view, in which human as more morally superior, towards more ecocentrism, like the considering the ecosystem as a holistic view. And I believe empathy building is the important first step, because it shapes the way how we communicate and how we establish social relationships with others and even with other species. And I want to focus on the cognitive empathy at the first stage, which the primary form is perspective taking. This is the foundation of all forms of empathy. And there are lots of studies in human-human empathy, and I would like to focus on human-animal empathy in this research because I think this is less explored. Also, it has a huge impact. For example, in the 1970s and 60s, the fact that scientists find that whales and dolphins, they have their language, and totally change the public perception of our relationship with animals and push for the regulation and policy change of ban the hunting. So this is symbolically really important step for us to develop human-animal empathy. Some previous presidents like Earth Species Project, they trying to decode animal communication, and also related that to like human language space. And because we have very different sensory modalities, it's really hard for us to imagine a world that's dramatically different from our capabilities and interests. And this is like human sensory homunculus, which represents how like, our brain process the sensory information according to the hierarchy and the importance. And I also find this interesting research on animal homunculus because the different evolutionary path. The homunculus shows also very different shapes, like some moles, rats that prioritize haptic, some are like more on the olfactory sense. So this brings me to look into more deeply on the field of sensory ecology, and there are sensory modalities that beyond human capabilities. For example, different types of vibration, the chemicals, electromagnetic energy, temperature, and I think smelling is an interesting perspective. And look, there are like different animal senses. It can have very different capability, like the bears, elk, wolves. They have like 1,000 times better than human, and in terms of the granularity and the concentration they can detect. And I see this as in many lots of animals, chemical cues is important for their social behavior and enabling them to navigate Also for the avoid the predators, and identifying their conspecifics. And in some species, for example, the freshwater fish, social recognition is primarily based on chemical cues. Because in the water, they're hard to depend on the vision, and such recognition mechanism is actually very vulnerable to our anthropogenic contaminants in the aquatic environment. And also inspired by the talk before by Professor Barrich, the smellosophy books talk about how the different sense and the connection to the cognitive level. And we can see from this diagram that this is kind of topological signal projection of vision and affection. It's very different, and there's no like for this affection, there's no like well-defined line up. Yeah, yeah, I see the Dr. Andrews show the books there. It's fickle and boundless, and we want to see study or the smelling maybe in a slightly different way. And also thanks to the previous research about homuncular flexibility that confirms that we have the ability to inhabit ourselves into non-human avatars in mixed reality or hybrid space. So that's become the foundation of me that converging different interests and into this research. So the first stage for me would be to investigate transsensory mapping. And here I think for becoming animals involve lots of modalities that beyond human capabilities, like thermal vision, lateral line of the fish that detect vibration, water pressure, chemical reception, the echolocation by ultrasound, and the electroception that perceive the electrical field. So we really want to investigate ways that how we can transform the sensory space and to relate to different species. And there's some technology that's also present in this conference I find very inspiring. For example, other imaging that transform affection to vision, and especially there's some development in forensic imaging that can visualize detection of others in real time and in real space. And this is important in my project to really transform that experience in a smooth and real time way. And I think the further this technology being developed, how to with better temporal and spatial resolution would be opportunity to kind of integrate those olfactory experience in my game. And so that's the second stage that I want to explore, is to create this field of immersion. And there are some example before, also from Media Lab, that kind of augment or enhance our hearing capability as other like fogs. And there are also some products that, for example, this one simulate the flying experience with VR headset. So we can have better understanding of how a bird perceive the world around. And also I'm really inspired by this project, which is Tree VR, that bring the participants and experience from a seed growing as a tree. And this involves actually some sense in the surrounding environment in a smooth way. So it's kind of a multi-sensory experience. And also it's trying to enhance this empathy building process. And there are also a lot of academic research in terms of perspective taking in the immersive system, how they perceive the body transfer, presence, and the inclusion of self. And I think the storytelling, the perspective, for example, in this artwork, it's really also articulate my interest very well. Like this transformed our human scale power towards the insects and let you wrestle with Renaissance beetle. So here, the non-anthropocentric storytelling matters. This is like a map according to a fish. This is very different from how we human see in our human maps. And from the smelling and affection perspective, I find some environmental challenges that can be embedded in my game storytelling. First one is about the seabird. And the seabird eat ocean plastics on the beach because it smells like food. This is research from National Geography that because those plastic debris, they are good platform for algae to grow, and the algae actually eventually break down and then emit this dimethyl sulfate, which is kind of similar in a krill that the seabird were looking for around the beach. In that sense, it creates a factory trap for those seabirds, and they end up eating ocean plastics. The other I find interesting is it's about anchovy. So lots of schooling fish, as you see on the top right, they are a very important link in the ecosystem. But the chemical and the plastic pollution in the ocean disrupts can have a big impact and disrupts their social recognition and organization while they are swimming and schooling, and these chemical cues that are similar to the smell of their conspecifics really have a big impact on this fish. And this is more detail like olfaction in our ecosystem that is a main common mechanism for like food localization and the social recognition in the among those animals. So I think these are the opportunities that I can develop some storytelling for the game, and also I want to evaluate the empathy building process through, for example, the interview, the survey, also in the real time with leveraging EEG and brain activities to really study how the empathy towards those animals being built and how people can relate themselves to these animals, and specifically by smelling. And yeah, that's my presentation. And really thank you for the chance to share and inspiration during the conference.
That was so great and so inspiring, Yujei. And it's amazing that you prepared this presentation on such a short notice. And Sophie Barwich, I see, is writing great stuff. Sophie, do you want to jump in and?
Yes, please. Please, let's have Professor Barwich herself tell us her thoughts. She's her phone is wonky. We can still hear you, I think. But may I say that I'm so impressed with how people have been resonating with this. And in the next section, we will start in about 20 minutes. We'll hear from the professionals who have been thinking about it for decades or years at least, or perhaps just months. But these are ideas also that are coming right now from this conference, which is what we were hoping to accomplish. The Osmocosm conference is something that we would like to make an annual event. This time it was a labor of love by everyone involved. Everybody was a volunteer. Nobody got paid. They had zero budget. But for next year, we hope to get the sponsorship of companies and philanthropic donations. The Osmocosm Foundation is a non-profit, recently incorporated in Massachusetts foundation. And I see Stephanie Brenner has joined us also from the Weizmann Institute. Welcome. And I would love to hear everybody's thoughts on how, what they have learned and what we can improve on next year. We see that this idea that we had to kind of put this into the people's minds and then hope to harvest their creativity has worked somewhat. Although, you know, very few people are like Yujei, who is just went for it. You know, other people are quite skeptical on presenting themselves and maybe a little afraid. So perhaps for next year, we shall establish a prize for best, or at least to engage the competitive nature of humanity. So with that, I'd like to open it up again to Chris and Carolina, whoever else wants to speak. We have about 20 minutes to discuss these emergent ideas. And this is as live and as raw and as new as it gets. So everyone's welcome to contribute.
Yes, I created a document for evaluation. So you can like write your pluses and deltas for us to review what you would like to see. And I will put it in a chat. So we would really appreciate the feedback from all of the participants. And we also like have one more presentation that we would like to share. So Matt, could you please like play the video now? Thank you.
Okay, thank you for having us. We're very excited to join you from the Gadigal land of the Eora Nation in Sydney, Australia. And we just want to acknowledge the Indigenous people of this land. So Tom and I together led a group of about 5 undergraduate students who are very talented designers. And we, through that, they developed this work that we're showing at Osmocosm. And I really encourage you to have a look at it. So it's in the Osmocapes link here, and it's this one over here, the eventful sensor room. Essentially, our students looked at an interesting kind of story world and characters within this world. They also created this short little advert or speculative ad. And I'm just going to very quickly talk about 2 takeaways for myself as a researcher, which I found very interesting. The first one was this very unexpected realism of the characters. So if we look at the characters, the students came up with a few key characters who we then see their kind of life in this world in the storyboard. It was quite alarming to me how realistic these characters were, coming from a biotechnology background and an office workspace where there is a kind of human, non-human relationships and laboratory cultures. The students didn't really realize how realistic they were being. And I thought this was very interesting for opening up ideas around how we start to help suspend the disbelief of the technologists themselves and scientists themselves, which is often not considered in the futuring space. And then the second takeaway that was very interesting for me was around their concept and branding. So the students actually did a huge amount of branding and iterations. And the last one that they landed on is this one over here, Smells Like Teen Spirit. It was quite interesting for me, especially because they had, especially in this one, it was very contemporary and kind of whimsical and magical. And that's very different, or in very strong contrast to the conventional futuring branding and this visual kind of language that we see. So often that's very minimalist and very kind of Apple-esque. So I think, again, this was a really great provocation for me to think about an interesting way that biotechnology might need to consider its branding strategies, especially when you're thinking about overcoming the unfamiliar and the overwhelming. So I'm going to pass over to my collaborator, Tom.
Thanks, Justin. The 2 takeaways for me were, one was this vent, which is in the center room. So the idea is that there's this center room that's instituted in a place of work where people go to have pleasurable experiences for the point of relaxation and productivity. And we were thinking about ways you could visualize scent, because it's obviously an intangible sensory experience. And at some point, the students touched on the notion of this vent being a very important thing. And it relates to this idea of metonym, which is a term from linguistics, which describes how we attach meaning to things through association. And we all thought it was a really interesting finding that people could, rather than, people will attach meaning to particular features of a room or particular things that they associate with a pleasurable or a displeasurable experience. And so the idea in this story is that the vent becomes a very prominent part in the imagination and the memory and the sensory experience of the people who are experiencing this center room. And the other key takeaway is that it's around the notion of selective novelty, or thinking about scenarios and futures that problematize this notion of technology as selective novelty. And so in our world, there's this notion of the center room being rolled out in a place of work. And the idea of this room in a way being really innovative and interesting, and it sounds really great, a place where you can go to experience pleasure based on a really specifically designed environment using microorganisms. But when that encounters the complexities of the everyday, and it depends on how it's rolled out, how people feel about experiencing that at their work, the way different characters interact with it, it becomes far less an isolated selective novelty and something that is enmeshed in the experience of the everyday in a really complex way. And if we think about any technology that at any point in time seems like a savior or an amazing innovation, once it becomes embedded in everyday situations, it becomes a lot more complicated. And that was once something that the students conveyed very effectively in the story. And that's it for me, Justin.
Yeah, that's it. So thank you so much for having us.
Thank you so very much. That was so good. I love the fact that you guys jumped in and you sort of engaged and grabbed it and created this new reality for us to consider and to ponder on. And this is exactly what we're trying to achieve. So you're helping our mission, and I think we'd like you to join us as much as you can and as much as you want. And we will be making opportunities available for all those who want to bring this future and who want to make sure that we understand it and we ideate together. And just as Prostate Cancer Foundation has taught us with their motto, we can cure together. We can cure the planet of a lot of its ills by understanding the power of this sort of forgotten sense, if you will. Although for many of us, it's not forgotten. It's actually at the very forefront of our existence. So Carolina and Chris, we have a few more minutes before we start welcoming our more formal speakers again. But please take it ahead, and
Yes,
I'm letting you drive the show.
Thank you. I would like to share the video that we
Please
heard about. I think it's we haven't seen it yet, so I'm sharing my screen right now. And here it goes. So thank you one more time for this wonderful impression. And I think before we start the next session, we have exactly 11 minutes. And I put in the chat the document about pluses and data, so you can make suggestions there for us to improve, or what would you like to see. And I would encourage you right now to share with us your thoughts. I'm going to put this document in the chat one more time, and also
while we're waiting on people to populate the chat, I would like Matt to please play this. It's a 1-minute video by the Prostate Cancer Foundation, which is featuring so prominently here. I think that while we're waiting for people to populate the chat and ask the questions, Matt, would you please play this again? It only goes for 1 minute, but I think it's quite telling. I just put it in the chat, Matt. The last one. It's a 1-minute video about dogs and their ability to smell prostate cancer and other diseases, and how to make them be part of your phone. Okay, if Matt's not listening, I can share my screen and do it. Let me do that then. I will do it from my end.
It just took me a
Okay, there you go. Okay, go ahead. There we go.
Remember tricorder? That all-powerful scanning device that identified everything from poisonous strawberries to alien life forms?
There it is. Pure tritanium.
We all know the cell phone in your pocket is getting close to tricorder-like greatness. But one thing is missing. It can't smell. The Prostate Cancer Foundation, in collaboration with Johns Hopkins University, MIT, and Britain's medical detection dogs, aims to change that. Newly published data proves, without a doubt, that dogs can smell prostate cancer. Now we're going to build a robotic nose to sniff out prostate cancer and put it in your phone. This is step 1 to get us there. Join us for the journey at pcf.org.
And in the spirit of sharing this wonderful content, Matt, may I ask you to play also the 3-minute video that is on the far right on our website, the canine olfaction potential. This was done by, this is the second time we're going to play it. It was done by Katie Teal, who is a high school student. And she just spoke to me on the phone for 20 minutes and then delighted and surprised me with this fantastic little video that she made. It only goes for 3 minutes, and it speaks to the power of this young individual to be able to condense these ideas into 3 minutes of just wonderful animation. Please take it ahead.
It's no secret that dogs have an extraordinary sense of smell. Their noses are engineered for the job. With an estimated 300 million scent receptors and larger brain space dedicated to olfaction, they have a hypersensitive nose. When they breathe in, part of the air is actually separated from what goes into the lungs. And when they breathe out, the slits in the side of their nose help it stay out of the way and bring in new air to sniff. It is because of this that people have learned to utilize their skill. Bomb-sniffing dogs patrol areas such as airports to keep them safe. There are dogs that check for the presence of drugs, and search dogs that track down and rescue people. So with all of this, what about smelling for disease? Everyone gives off scent. Some smells people can detect, like that bad morning breath, but many we can't. Changes in body chemistry can give off smells through volatile organic compounds that can signal something is wrong, and studies have shown that dogs can detect this. Currently, there are even dogs trained to alert diabetic owners of drops or increases in their blood sugar. What about indicating disease? Well, dogs can smell that too. They have been trained to detect and indicate cancerous urine and breath samples. While results vary based on the training and the dog's interest in the job, some dogs have been able to indicate cancer with specificities and sensitivities upwards of 70%, and they increase more with training. It has been shown that dogs can pick cancerous samples with an accuracy greater than what's due to chance, and the prospect of using olfaction to find diseases such as cancer is exciting. As compared to current, more invasive tests and biopsies, finding disease through olfaction is quicker and easier. So are you going to see a bunch of cancer-sniffing dogs patrolling your local hospital? Or perhaps in the back sniffing mass numbers of samples? No. As cute as that sounds, there would be many problems with that. Not only would it take an incredible amount of work and resources to train that many dogs, as each one would have to be individually tested for their accuracy, as living things they can also have off days, get tired, and have to take potty breaks. So what is next? There is a current effort to make electronic noses smell disease the way dogs can. These devices can determine what the compounds are that they are smelling, and by observing how the dogs are trained and what they react to, people can train these devices to do the same. By teaching a smelling machine to copy the dogs and using that instead, the problems of using dogs for indication of disease are eliminated. There is hope in the future to even put these smelling devices in phones. Since many people keep their phones on them most of the time, the phone could learn a baseline smell and alert the owner if a dangerous change was detected. For diseases such as cancer, early diagnosis is monumentally important. Being able to quickly detect a suspicious change in the compounds released through someone's scent could make a difference between life and death. Whether through making diagnostic tests that utilize olfaction or even putting that utility into phones, smelling out disease is a promising way to aid medical professionals in detection. Hopefully, with the help of scientists, trainers, and of course our four-legged friends, machine olfaction will be used in the future to help improve people's lives and health.
What a wonderful and pithy expose of what we're trying to achieve here. Thank you to Katie Teal, a high school student from, I might get into trouble. I think she's from Florida, but I'm not sure. Okay, so Carolina, we have 4 more minutes before Bruce speaks. I know he's ready, but if you don't have anything to share, I could set the stage for Bruce and examine a little bit about on what we have shown without stepping on his presentation.